work and started doing it, which was this past Monday. I was actually helping him. There was a long list of books that we had to pull out for a history. Yeah, so we're pulling out these books for a history of binding class. That's coming in, I guess, to just study bindings, because we have books at the York Minster Library, basically spanning the range of printed books. So we have this long list. It's like 2 pages long. He just kind of gave me a page of it. He was like, you figured out the numbering system around here, right? And I was like, I'm fine. I'll figure it out. He's like, okay, we'll just go look for these books. And the way the numbering system works in the old books room is each bookshelf has a Roman numeral number, and then on each shelf, individual shelf of the bookcase, each one has a letter, and then each of the books on the letter of that shelf has a number, in Arabic numerals. So a book could be Roman numeral 10, M20. So then I have to go to 10, go to the M shelf, count over 20 books. I mean, they have little paper slips in them, but the paper slips aren't facing you, so I just kind of counted books. So I definitely had an awesome 2.5 hours of totally being a librarian, walking up the narrow staircase and down the narrow staircase, and piling books up and carrying them down and putting them up, and like it was pretty awesome because I am seeing books that were found. One book had been found in the Tower of London in the early 1600s, and it had belonged to the personal book collection of Henry VIII. These are, I'm pulling out books from early 16th century Italy, late 15th century England, late 15th century Low Countries, books on every conceivable subject in every conceivable language. I mean, it's great. It's awesome. It's so much fun. Except it's freezing cold in there because, I mean, it's cold outside because it's November, well, late October, early November in England, and thing about stone buildings that I've mentioned before in the blog, they're cold. Like, they're just never, I'm figuring out that they're just never warm ever. Maybe in like high summer, they're balmy, but in the winter they're just freezing cold. So it's chilly in there anyway because it's a stone chapel. But then to keep the books from rotting, like damp is bad for books. Actually, you have to keep the temperature pretty stable because if it gets too damp, mold grows and that just pretty much eats books. But if it gets too dry, it dries out paper and cracks parchment and other bad things. So they have on each level of the old book room and in another old book room next to that one, they have these little things. They look almost like Richter scales, only they're vertical, and there's two little needles, and they just kind of track the temperature and the humidity. They just kind of go along. So that's cool. And when you put the books back, you have to be very careful about them because they have to stay right at the edge of the bookshelf. Because if they're pushed all the way back, you cut off the air circulation, and then the books are pressed against a damp stone wall. And what does that equal? Mold, which is terrible. Not only because I'm allergic to it, but because it eats books. And there were a couple books in there that looked to have some mold damage. But they keep the books in pretty good condition by keeping the temperature low and by keeping 5 or 6 fans running and 2 or 3 humidifiers all the time. So what is a chilly stone cathedral or stone chapel becomes even colder because there's like 5 or 6 fans on all the time, like big stand-up World War fans. So I was having fun pulling out books. I looked like a total, I guess, medieval librarian. Not really medieval, but I had, my sweatshirt on and fingerless gloves, black and white striped fingerless gloves. So I'm like sticking a pen in my hair and taking it out and checking it off, and then putting my pencil, because I'm not allowed to have pens around books that old. Pencil in my mouth, carrying like 15 books down these stairs, trying really hard not to trip because I'm in 3-inch clogs. But it's great. I love it. It's so awesome. It's great. And side perk, being a York Minster Library volunteer, I get 10% off at the York Minster gift shop, which has a lot of cool gifts in it, and I've already, gone and checked it out, and I'm pretty sure quite a few of my Christmas presents for people are going to come from that gift shop. It's definitely, I mean, they have some cheesy things in there, but most of it is pretty nice. The York Minster is pretty well done. I've been in there and wandered around the cathedral. I went there for Evensong one night, which is really cool. I haven't yet done the full tour thing, which apparently University of York students can do for free, which is good because that saves me £9. Yeah, apparently you just like have to go up onto the tower because you can see pretty much the whole city because the York Minster is the tallest thing inside the old city, I think, and pretty much dominates that half of the city that it's in. You can see it for most of the old streets. So that is pretty cool. Random awesome fact about the old book collection. The core of the old book collection, about 3,000 of the books, is made up of the collection of a certain Tobias Matthews, who was the Archbishop of York in the late 1600s, early 1700s. And he was a great book collector. He collected some of the oldest books in the collection are from his collection, which is awesome. And when he died, he left the books to his wife. And technically, his wife should have left them to their son. But she was absolutely adamant that her son would never see so much as a scrap of those books and donated all 3,000 of them to the York Minster Library upon her death several years later. And the reason she was so adamant that her son would not get any of these books was because her son had decided that he was going to convert to Roman Catholicism, and she was really angry about that and decided he couldn't have any books, which I just trolled over a little bit because I'm a historian and things like that make me laugh. So that's the York Minster Library. Classes on Tuesdays. What is classes? Which I do on Tuesdays. I have class from 9:15 to 11, and then from 3:15 to 5. Which seems like a lot, but it's the only day I have class, so it's not too bad. The cool thing about classes here, they're different from American classes. They're not really like lecture-based. Like, you don't go and sit and listen to the professor talk the whole time. So that's cool. I mean, there's a ton of reading that you have to do for these classes. So much reading. And it's not like set reading. It's not like in America we get a textbook or like 3 or 4 books and some online readings and everybody reads the same thing. No, you get, at least in one of my classes, in my first class, which is called Dragons, Damsels, and Dancing, Popular Culture in Late Medieval England, which covers the period about from around the Black Death in like the 1348, like 1340s, up to late 1400s. In that class, there's a reading list with 3 or 4 core readings that everybody is expected to read, and these can be anything from 5 or 6 page articles to books, all books that thick. And then there's usually 1 or 2 primary sources that we read as well. And then there's just a list of further reading and recommended reading. And the professor's like, well, these 2 or 3 things of the core reading everybody should really read, and then just kind of read up on your own, whatever. So, yeah. That seems to be one of the big things in British classes. You just kind of read up on the subject yourself, and you just kind of find books yourself. I mean, you get an extensive reading list from the professor, but it's not really as structured as American classes, which kind of freaks me out because I'm one of those people who kind of sets out, okay, this is what I've been told to do, and so I'm just going to do it all and then be done. So if somebody tells me, just kind of read up on it, I'm like, well, how much should I read, and which books, and what should I read it on? But, you know, after a couple weeks, I've pretty much picked up kind of how much I need to read and whatnot, and on the syllabus there's always like a set of questions or whatever topic you're going to talk about, so I always just make sure I can, you know, address the topic alright, address the topic rather well, or, you know, answer the questions that are said, and I'm okay. But then you go to class and it's a seminar, not a lecture, so everybody kind of sits around and the professor says, okay, so what do you make of this question? Or we're going to talk about this topic, what do you guys think about it? And then everybody just kind of talks and you take notes on what everybody's saying. And at least in my classes, in the history type classes, you don't have tests so much as you just write some